The arch-opportunist Rondero Castillo, as a result of this reactionary failure, was converted by a stroke of luck into the figurehead of the bureaucratic faction of the big bourgeoisie and the head of the opportunist and revisionist of the most diverse stripe. Castillo was a member of the Peasant Patrols, Rondas Campesinas, a counter-revolutionary organization at the service of the low-intensity war led by the U.S. imperialism against the People's War. These Rondas are an auxiliary force of the genocidal armed forces in the counter-revolutionary war. And Castillo then, as a representative of the conservative and counter-revolutionary peasants for more than 2 decades, belonged to the party of the Yankee with the Chulo, Toledo, whom he abandoned. Then, in collusion with the rats of the right opportunist, revisionist, and capitulationist line, ROL, he climbed up to the presidency of the National Struggle Committee of the Indefinite National Strike of SUTEP of 2017, HNI 2017, against the consistent opposition of the rank-and-file and leaders of the class-conscious teachers. HNI 2017, which he betrayed in the service of the boss's Ministry of Education. This opportunist, after betraying the HNI and selling the listed demands to the Peronal with the help of the Peronal and the rats of the ROL with influence in some sectors of the teachers, constituted the famous opportunist and divisive Federation from Death to oppose the reconstitution of classes, SUTEP from the rank and file. SUTEP, what are we saying? Yankee with a chulo? What? This is incredible rhetoric. Whoever wrote this is clearly mad and pissed off. And so I guess the conversation is Pedro Castillo the hope and change that we need? Is Pedro Castillo more of a Duterte? Is he going to be a leftist figure that's going to get in there and just become a right-wing psycho? Or is he actually the leftist that we need? Yeah, he's supposed to nationalize. The party is Marxist-Leninist. The party is Marxist-Leninist. And so I feel like where you come down on this is whether or not you have hope in constitutional or electoral politics. And frankly, I think there's a lot of hope in electoral and constitutional politics because, I mean, once let's assume the People's War is victorious, then you're going to have some kind of system of laws in place. And I don't know who these people are. They're just as foreign to me. They're just as foreign to me as Pedro Castillo. So Pedro Castillo, from what I understand, even if he's not as Marxist or socialist as, he's very liberal and he's leftist, and the era of Fujimorism this is fascism. Peru has been under a dark cloak of fascism for fucking decades. That Keiko Fujimori, about 3 fucking times, she's almost won this shit. So that means for 15 years, the popular Nazi party, the popular force is what the fucking Nazi party. So the fact that, she's getting votes, this is what, Hitler did, just kept on, anyways. The Fujimorism is neoliberalism with a gun, and so essentially it's American politics, right? So it's Milton Friedman, it's neoliberalism, and it's, the state government, nation-state theory, which is all over the place. And so he kind of attacks that, and, I'm somewhat sympathetic with, a people's war. I just feel like there's constitutional and electoral hope. But if you don't respect any of those things, then I feel like there's 2 kinds of people that's for a people's war. They realize that there isn't any hope and that this is the only fucking way, or they're one of the people that just want to, destroy the world and they want to watch the world burn, but they want to do it for a good cause. They want to do it to make sure everybody gets some bread and everybody gets some housing. What? We're going to have a communist, war, so everybody's going to get bread and housing, but we're going to be really terrible to one another. So the People's War, the reason why I'm opposed to a People's War, and perhaps this motherfucker, Pedro Castillo, let's assume he's, his right wing is a fucking Biden, right? So he's not a leftist at all. He's a fucking neoliberal. But what he did is, lifted the cloak of Fujimorism. And so right now, what it looks like to me is you got a new dawn in Peru. They've been, oppressed by fascism, and now they're going to say, hey, one of us, union, togetherness, solidarity. So for me, Pedro Castillo, in spite of his failings, in spite of his conservative, his social conservative shit, and maybe he's not as Marxist socialist as I would like, right? He's not communist and he's not shining path, but he's actually shown the shining path to victory. So if this, whoever the People's War is, how come you didn't put up your candidate? Put up a candidate for fucking president, motherfuckers. You should have had a candidate every goddamn time. If they, railroaded you or whatever, then you could say, well, we tried to do it through the, but this is just what some fucking shadowy underground group is writing all this fucking hatred, against this guy. And I don't know. I don't know if he's the worst. Let me give you, I'll read another paragraph from Jacobin, and then I'll come back to this. And then I'll conclude with this. So, I feel like Pedro Castillo has shown a shining path. He's shown the communists, whoever these people are, how to get power in Peru. Evo Morales has done it. Pepe Mujica has done it. And people in Sweden, Germany. We get socialists elected into power all the time throughout the world. Just not in America. Just not in America. So here's Jacobin. Who is Pedro Castillo? Before becoming a school teacher and a trade union leader, Pedro Castillo was a Rondero. This is a Peruvian colloquialism for peasant-led self-defense patrols formed in the 1970s. Now that sounds different. He said it was an anti-reactionary, anti-revolutionary force. But this here is just saying that it's a peasant-led self-defense patrol. So you're poor, your police and the state ain't doing shit, you get in a peasant-led, that's a militia. That's a peasant militia. Peasant self-defense militia. They could go, right-wing or left-wing. Whoever is for self-defense, whoever wants self-defense where there is no state or police protection and says, we got to do something for ourselves. Amid the bloody internal war waged between the Maoist Shining Path and the Peruvian state in the 1980s and 90s, those groups often assumed state-sponsored militia duties, particularly under Alberto Fujimori. And so the argument now goes that because there's a war between the state and Maoist Shining Path, since he was this peasant-led self-defense patrol, this Rondero, then therefore he clearly must be with the Peruvian state. Maybe that might be true. He might have fought with Alberto Fujimori, but he could have also fought with the Maoist Shining Path. He could have been more radical than what we, think. So despite the incongruities, many on the Peruvian left cite that background and the fact that Castillo has issued equivocal messages about MOVADEF, the Shining Path Associated Political Organization, as an indictment of the politicians' ultra-leftism and his proclivity for military solutions to political matters. Peru's Liberate Political Manual, drafted by party leader Vladimir Cerrón, does in fact stipulate the autonomy of the peasant ronda militias would be respected. So they're going to, the peasant fucking militias are going to be, you have to. In the places where there's no police and no state, people have to defend themselves. And if you're saying they can't defend themselves, what the goddamn flying fuck are you saying? They just have to get fucking raped and murdered and robbed and shit? No, Democrats do need to be against crime. We do have a social contract. We do have a social contract. We pay you the fucking taxes and this and that, and you get the power, but you got to, give a shit about justice. You got to ask questions. And if you're not being a good police officer and you're not tackling crime, well then people are going to organize themselves. Because what we're going to do, just sit here and let you motherfuckers do anything and everything? I don't fucking think so. So, the fact that Castillo issued incendiary statements about the need to dissolve Congress and eliminate the Peruvian Constitutional Court, two unpopular public institutions, says that he's more of an authoritarian. I guess it remains to be seen. We haven't even declared a goddamn winner yet, right? I think it's clear. We only got 100% of the results in. Pedro only thinks he's won. All those presidents of Latin and South America thinks he's won. But we got to have Keiko Fujimori. Donald isn't even going to concede. Donald will never fucking concede, even though it's clear as fucking day. I don't know, maybe I haven't actually looked at all the evidence with the fucking electoral integrity. I'm sure there's questions here and there, but I believe William Barr, when it comes to Donald Trump, said that there was not widespread voter fraud. There is not evidence for widespread voter fraud. Therefore, you're trying to invalidate millions. No, not going to fucking happen. There's no widespread voter fraud. So, behind the opportunist Castillo, representative of the bureaucracy, are other opportunists as shameless as he, namely those of Frente Amplio, those of New Peru, and others of the most varied colors and shagginess. but all of them aligned behind the reactionary task of restructuring the old bureaucratic landlord state to overcome the generalized crisis. Saviors of the state collapse through their vaunted constituent assembly and new constitution. How would it benefit the people in the nation? Obviously nothing. Or have the proletariat, the mainly poor peasantry, and the people in general ever benefit from the implementation of these famous democratic proposals? So this motherfucker is against democracy, right? And perhaps in the situation in Peru, maybe there is no fucking, light. Maybe there is no, it's just so fucking terrible that only a people's war can get you victory. But I still believe in electoral and constitutional, changes, and until revolutions. I believe in electoral and constitutional revolutions. And so, until you've, even considered it, and until you thought, like, how could we get those things accomplished, then I think you're just kind of, just sad and depressed. Maybe your life, maybe you're being oppressed yourself. And if you're being oppressed yourself, then you do need to stand up and nip that shit in the bud. Because Jordan Peterson says either you're being a whiny bitch or you're being oppressed. And those are two completely different things. If you're being oppressed, you got to do something about it. So, I think that the shining path is Pedro Castillo. If they steal from Pedro Castillo, then the people's war is back on. This is like the third-party argument almost. We need a third party. We need a people's war when it comes to the failure of the two-party system. So, I'm going to give Democrats 2 years, Republicans 2 years, and then I'm going to give up on the two-party system forever and ever. Amen. Amen. I'm a progressive through and through, so it doesn't, being a progressive transcends the two-party system. But, so in 4 years when I, say fuck the two-party system, then whatever, work the third parties have been doing, we can pick up where they're going, or we'll have to start brand new. It'd be nice if people were already working on that kind of shit. And so if the third party's right, if the two-party system, then the third-party system, then you got, probably the people's war is, that's probably the last resort. You probably have a general strike, maybe do a general strike and do, I don't know, a couple protests or some shit, right? You can't just go straight to people's war like, oh, fuck, they're going to raise postage stamps. They're raising the rates of postage stamps. Fuck it. People's war. You can't just do a people's war. It's got to be unbearable, right, when the situation is unbearable. And what is it? It's insufferable. So it's insufferable. It can't be tolerated. It's unfucking bearable. It's insufferable. So, conclusion. Failure of the electoral farce of 2021. Elections considered crucial for the reaction, for which in conclusion we quote Chairman Gonzalo in his speech on the 10th anniversary of the People's War. As the recent session of the Central Committee celebrating the triumphant 10th anniversary of the People's War concluded, Peruvian reaction and its master, mainly Yankee imperialism, need to reboost bureaucratic capitalism, restructure the state again, and annihilate the People's War. These are their needs and their dreams because bureaucratic capitalism is in its deepest economic crisis to date, plunging the whole of the old Peruvian society into its most serious general crisis, while its state, the outdated dictatorship of big bourgeoisie and landowners, restructured for the third time in this century, 1978, as it had to be, continues to be a rotten, bureaucratic military machine, more oppressive and bloody, the more impotent it appears in the face of the development of the people's struggle. And because the People's War in these 10 vicious years, sustained by the masses, mainly of the poor peasantry and under the leadership of the party, has come to realize the shockingly real perspective of seizing power throughout the country for the proletariat and the people. Reactionary imperialist needs, plans, and desires will inevitably further strengthen the class struggle, developing the mass struggle and raising the People's War to its highest expression. The best thing for the People's War is to have universal peace for everybody. Are you fighting for peace? Is that what war for peace? Because if it's not a revolutionary war, you can go ahead and count me out. But only revolutionary war is the only legitimate kind of war. War is murder, mass murder. If it's not for a revolutionary ends, for revolutionary ends, then what's the point? So, yeah, there you go. I think that there's hope for electoral. I think Pedro Castillo has shown the shining path, a shining path to getting power. You don't have to just be a bunch of, you know, guerrillas, underground guerrillas in the fucking, you know, goddamn mountains or whatever. You can actually come out, write a constitution, pass some fucking laws now. You know, you got the cloak, the fascist cloak of Fujimorism, I think is very important. It's, 50 years, he did 90s, 2000s. So for 30 fucking years, Peru has been under this, you know, fascist fucking party. So for 30 fucking years, is he going to be, you know, any better? I don't know. If he isn't, then we'll kick him out. But at the very least, we're going to, you know, the fucking fascists, we're knocking the top fascists, you know, the top fascists of Peru is going to get knocked down a peg. And so I'm hoping that, you know, if Pedro Castillo isn't the man, then an Evo Morales or a Pepe Mujica or Hugo Chavez or a fucking Leninist is actually right around the corner. And the problem with Lenin, I'll just mention this, a little bit of theory. Maoist, he killed a shit ton of Chinese people, right? Genocidal fucking maniac there. And then Lenin, well, after the goddamn, you know, they could have got elected, but instead Lenin just seizes power and then has a 7-year bloody fucking civil war. So if he would have got elected, if he could have got the consent of the people beforehand, somehow elections, referendums, some shit, but he seized fucking power, and then there's a civil war for 7 fucking years, and, you know, it was one of the most, you know, historical, it's one of the most important revolutions, the Russian Revolution was, but they could have done it a lot better. They could have won the Constituent Assembly. There was a possibility of the Constituent Assembly electing the Bolsheviks. And if the Constituent Assembly would have elected the Bolsheviks, they wouldn't have had to do the October Revolution, and they wouldn't have had to do the 7-year Civil War because the people would have, you know, the council chose them. The convention chose them, so they would have had democratic legitimacy. Instead, Lenin just says, fuck you motherfuckers. And there's something to be said about, you know, in historical perspective, just a badass that just comes in and just kind of cleans house, like Abraham Lincoln, right? Just comes in, slavery is wrong, you stupid motherfuckers, and then boom, right? Now slavery is gone. So a Leninist, when shit's, you know, when your back is up against the wall and there's no hope, then I could see how you could see a Leninist or a People's War to be, you know, a possibility. So, but I've also heard people that don't even consider constitutional and electoral revolutions. It's just, there's just a darkness in them. And so, you know, if you're just being dark, that's not fucking good enough for me. If you actually want real change, you want people to have housing and you want people to have food and shit, I think that there's a lot for, you know, if you're an American, you have a lot of choices. I think you have a lot more choices than what you think. And then if you're Peruvian, I'm not for sure what it's like to be a Peruvian. So if it's unbearable, then you got to do what you got to do. But if you could pass a law or two, if you have, I mean, unions, they had a union strike and shit like that. So I think where there's people, there's power. Isn't that what Fred Hampton says? So there you go. Was Pedro Castillo a Rondero? Yeah, apparently he is. You know, everybody's saying he is. But what kind of Rondero? Was he for Fujimori? Was he, you know, is Fujimorism over? If he was part of the Fujimori fucking peasant patrols, then Fujimorism is still here. Anyway, I gotta sneeze. Ugh.